Good morning and welcome to this webinar on alternative forms of land and property ownership. My name is Clotilde Clark-Foulquier. I coordinate the Housing Solutions Platform Partnership, and I would like to welcome all participants and speakers for joining us today. Before I give the floor to my colleague Miriam, who will facilitate this webinar, I just wanted to tell you a bit more about the background of this webinar and the background of the Housing Solutions Platform partnership. So the Housing Solutions Platform is a partnership between Housing Europe, the Fondation Abbé Pierre, and FIANSA. FIANSA is the European Federation of National Organizations working with the homeless. Our common goal is to identify, debate, and promote together innovative solutions for affordable housing in Europe. In this framework, last year we published a compendium of some of the most innovative and daring examples of housing solutions to homelessness and housing exclusion. So this is the publication. You can find it online. So we selected 50 projects. Those projects focus on providing safe, decent, and affordable housing solutions through many different ways, including, for instance, innovative construction, new legal mechanisms, new forms of collaboration, prevention from housing exclusion, activation of the vacant stock of housing or land. And this publication was based on a call for proposal we launched, and then projects were selected by a steering committee composed of 9 housing experts coming from different parts of Europe and representing really a cross-sectoral approach to housing. So the publication is available online, and I will send you the link on the chat so you can have a look at it. This project was financed by the King Baudouin Foundation in Belgium and the Y Foundation in Finland. And the aim of the publication was really to encourage different stakeholders to become more innovative in the provision of affordable housing solutions and to help filling in the gap in the existing system. So to follow up on this book, last year, we have decided this year to have a series of learning webinars. The first one was in April, focusing on the role that churches or faith-based organizations can play in tackling homelessness and housing exclusion. This webinar is available on our website if you want to watch it or have a look at the presentation. Today we propose something completely different and to explore projects based on innovative rethinking of ownership and urban development. So while access to affordable, decent housing is an increasing challenge for most urban areas in Europe, we propose to look at 3 projects that have been selected that are in the publication I mentioned earlier, and that brought forward new ways to look at housing ownership and urban development through legal and financial innovation. So I'll leave the floor to Miriam to tell you more about those projects. Thank you very much for being here with us.
Thanks, Clotilde. Hi, everyone. I'm Miriam, also with Housing Solutions Platform. I'm quickly going to go over some house rules before handing over the floor to our speakers. So we have an opening speaker and 3 speakers today who are each going to speak for about 10 to 15 minutes. There will be a Q&A session after, but since we have quite a lot of time, we might also take any collected questions directly after each presentation so that it's fresh in everyone's mind. And to ask your questions, please use the questions tab that you'll find on the right-hand side. And please don't hesitate to send in your questions as soon as you have them so that we can collect them as we go. And for any technical difficulties or any questions relating to Housing Solutions Platform, you can use the chat function and you can message me or Clotilde directly. I will be introducing the speakers, I think, as we go. So that's all for the house rules. And I think with this said, I will start by giving the floor to Sorka Edwards from Housing Europe, who is going to give us some opening remarks. So Sorka, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So indeed, on behalf of Housing Europe, for those of you who don't know, it's the Federation of Public, Cooperative and Social Housing Providers in Europe. It's really a pleasure to have the opportunity to share just a few words as a way of introduction to this increasingly crucial topic, and that of land. So increasingly the feedback we get from affordable and social housing providers that it is one of the key factors pushing up prices in the delivery of affordable and social housing. So I think it's great that we are putting our heads together in this way to highlight concrete solutions. Also, of course, a moment to thank our partners in the Housing Solutions platform and thank those involved in this initiative, so Fianza, Fondation Abbé Pierre, as well, of course, as our wonderful lineup of speakers who will come up after me, and all of those who made today's event possible, even in these ongoing tricky times. So the issue of land, it's a complex one. It is very often overlooked, or at least misunderstood. And so particularly when it comes to the issue of housing for affordability. So as we are dealing now with, for example, many member states without a very developed affordable housing policy, very often they actually overlook the issue of land, and they miss the opportunities there are, for example, with holding on to land ownership. Unlike other capital assets, it's fixed in place, obviously, and it's not reproducible, and it's not man-made. It simply exists. It is the ground beneath our feet. It's plentiful, and yet somehow we have conspired through centuries of policies empowering landowners to make it scarce. Given that land costs nothing to produce, and yet nothing can be produced without land, it's a very enticing asset to hold on to. And we have seen that since the financial crash of 2007, 2008, central banks the world over have scrambled to provide huge amounts of liquidity to markets, including buying bonds on an unprecedented scale, keeping yields low. And the current COVID-19 pandemic has served to actually reinforce this trend. So as a result of low returns on offer from traditional avenues of investment, so hedge funds, pension funds, and other investment vehicles have increasingly seen the value of land. But they don't see this value as an element of production or innovation, but rather as a means to extract income from the genuinely productive sectors of the economy. And land, unfortunately, is now the must-have asset. So what we have seen is the bidding war for land which has emerged, particularly in large urban centres, has obviously driven up prices. And this in turn has meant that those who own land must extract ever higher prices from renters in order to justify their investment. So this cycle, this higher and higher prices inevitably attract more and more people to the investment prospects of land, creating this sad and depressing vicious circle in which ordinary citizens like us are really absent from the conversation. However, there is hope, and I think we're going to get fragments of that hope today. So many cities are indeed introducing new policies, and we're seeing more and more citizen-led initiatives against this flow of extractive investment. And initiatives like this that we're going to hear about today are helping to highlight those solutions. In addition to this, even at international levels, we will highlight the work that Housing Europe is currently doing in partnership with the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe and the UN Habitat on this very issue, because it has been also registered at international level as something we have to grapple. So the Housing 2030 initiative, which we have recently launched together, aims to also highlight best practice in relation to land, but also environmental sustainability, finance, governance and regulation, to offer policymakers real solutions struggling with the issue of housing affordability. Some of the practices that have come out of that initiative at a recent seminar from stretching out across the UNEC region. We heard from the city of Paris, for instance, which is pioneering urban planning models aimed at maximizing social return from the resources which already exist. We heard also from Vienna, where the public land bank provider provides land for housing, which is not only affordable, but also innovative and community building. We heard also how the city of Munich is leasing public land to providers of public and cooperative housing, meaning, of course, and this is crucial, that land is retained as a public asset for future generations. And we heard also about the fantastic work of the Scottish Land Commission, which aims to maximise the public return from the use of land, as well as addressing issues like vacant and derelict land currently going to waste. I could go on, but that is going to be left to our speakers. So we're going to then hear today from 3 concrete local examples of the way we can indeed tackle this cycle. And I would hope also that these examples from the Housing Solutions Platform can also be fed up to international level, to policymakers at national levels and international levels to feed this process, because the key way forward is, of course, to give concrete examples which inspire. So I hand over the floor to our first speaker. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Sorka. I quickly just wanted to, since I didn't introduce them before, we will first be hearing from Geert de Pauw, who coordinates the Brussels Community Land Trust, or CLTs as they are called. This is a model that it's premised on the separation of land and building and ensuring permanent affordability through anti-speculative resale mechanisms. It originated in the United States and has slowly been making its way to Europe. But I will give the floor to Geert so he can tell us more.
Good morning, everyone, and thanks a lot for the introduction and for the invitation. Indeed, I'll tell you a little bit about the Community Land Trust model, the way it works, and also the way we use it in Brussels since over 8 years now. Community Land Trusts, in fact, their basic idea is that land should be considered as a common good to be used in the interest of the community and to protect the interest of the community interest in the long term. Typically, community land trusts are non-profit organizations whose main objective is to own land and to keep land forever, to use it for the benefit of the community, and to build on that land permanently affordable housing, as well as other uses such as community space, local businesses, workshops, urban farming, etc. Everything could be built on this community land as long as it's in the interest of the community. And typically also community land trusts are democratically governed by the community. So one of the basic elements of community land trust is its innovative model of tenure, in which land is owned collectively by the community and the homes on the land are owned individually or by other organizations such as cooperatives or nonprofits. Why do we speak of community land? In fact, it is the community land trust who owns the land, but the CLT tries to represent the local community because it is democratically governed by all stakeholders of the community. CLTs are typically open membership organizations in which as well the residents of the homes on CLT land are represented, but also other representatives of the community. And CLTs look for a balance between the interest of the wider community and the individual residents. And this is translated in the board composition. Typically, a community land trust board is composed for 1/3 of homeowners living on CLT land, for 1/3 of representatives of the surrounding community, and then for 1/3 of representatives of the general interests, who can be public officials or experts, for instance. And then one other very important aspect of the CLT model is the permanent affordability. CLT homes are typically made affordable through grants or through donations, which as such is not so innovative, but which is the innovative part of it is that homes stay affordable forever, not only for the first homeowners, but time after time. Each time that a home is resold, it stays affordable for low-income groups, and sometimes becomes even relatively more affordable. And that is through a resale formula. As an owner of the land, CLTs can control the resale and can set a limited resale price, which avoids land and real estate speculation. Now a few words about how we use this model in Brussels. In Brussels, we started thinking about the creation of a community land trust more than 10 years ago in a context of increasing housing crisis. Since the year 2000 in Brussels, housing prices started to increase year after year, and it hasn't stopped since, which had very dramatic consequences for especially low-income families who didn't find any possibility anymore to find decent housing in a market that was largely a private housing market. So activists and associations joined forces to think about ways of producing affordable housing themselves, after trying to convince the authorities to build more social housing, and after seeing that it was really difficult to push this forward, we looked for new ways, new innovative ways, and finally we convinced the regional government in 2012 to give us the possibility to start pilot projects. And then we created our Community Land Trust Brussels, CLTB, that is composed of two legal bodies, a foundation and a non-profit association. Our membership is now about 400 applicant homeowners, 200 supporting members, and then 30 associations we closely work with to develop our projects. Our portfolio is 50 homes that are occupied and they are divided over 4 housing projects in different municipalities in Brussels. There are 120 more homes in the building or the planning process. And within these housing projects, there are also 7 community facilities integrated. On this map, you can see, well, it's not the most recent map, but what you can see here is that our projects are situated in different municipalities in Brussels, but concentrated around the canal, which is the ancient industrial area, and which are also the poorest neighborhoods in the Brussels region. Our target group is the same target group as people who are for social housing, households that want to get a CLT home have to be eligible for social housing, and also the very poorest are among them, because we use an income adjusted prices to make it possible for every single family in Brussels, I mean, within these income criteria, to buy a home on CLT land. Another important part of what we do is in emancipation of our residents, and this emancipation goes through, first of all, of course, the fact to give people the possibility to build some equity as homeowner is very important for poor families. On the other hand, the way we organize our projects, the very participatory way we do this, is for us also key in building this emancipation. And this participation is on two different levels. First of all, on the project level. So people, future homeowners, are very involved in the building of our projects. And on the other hand, they're also involved, as I said earlier, in the governance of our organization. Here you see a few examples of the projects that are already occupied or in the building. I'll show you 3 examples of our projects. The first one is our first pilot project called Le Nid, which means the nest, in the municipality of Anderlecht. It is 7 homes. One of the homes is suitable for a wheelchair user. There is a community space and a garden open to the neighborhood, and it's occupied since last year. This one is in the municipality of Molenbeek. Do you still see my presentation? No?
No, I think we lost it.
Yeah, one moment. I don't know what happens.
Are you able to share your screen again?
Does it work now?
Yes.
Okay, because I don't see it. Oh, what? It's okay. You see my presentation?
Yeah, we see your computer, so we see the kind of PowerPoint,
Okay.
but it's not in full screen.
No, it's better.
Yes, it's perfect.
Is it okay like that?
Yes.
Okay, sorry. So this project is called Arc-en-Ciel, meaning rainbow, in the municipality of Molenbeek. Occupied since the beginning of this year, 32 units, and on the ground floor there's a feminist community center. And I don't know if you see the picture of Fatima, who is one of the leaders of this community, and she is you see her during a flea market that the residents organize since 2 years, so since the building process began, because for them it was very important to create already links with the surrounding community. This is a project called Calico, which is situated in the municipality of Forêt. It is an EU-funded project. It is rewarded with Urban Innovative Actions funding. And it is a typical project for us because here we work with other groups. Part of it are typical CLT housing, but there is also co-housing. Two co-housing groups we are working with. One is a group providing housing for poor women, single women with children, and the other one is a co-housing group who wants to integrate within their homes accommodation for birth and for end of life within the co-housing project. And there are also 2 community spaces and 2 housing first units that will be used by a partner association called Diogène. And this has to be should be occupied next year if we don't have too much delay with the corona crisis. This is just to show the importance of residents' involvement and participation. Every project we start, before we start a project, we organize architectural workshops in which we ask future residents, but also neighbors and neighborhood associations to think with us about the program of the future homes. And these same people are also involved in the selection of the architect through the tender procedure. Also, during the construction phase, residents are invited to participate in the to visit regularly the construction site to learn more about how the homes are built. And this is just to show that for us, it's also important to create links with the neighborhoods in which we are active. This is an example of an old warehouse where we will start building next year, but in the meantime, for 2 years, it will be used for organizing community activities as a way to create links with the neighborhoods in which we're active. So all of this is possible thanks to a lot of partnerships. First of all, of course, the regional support, or the regional government gives us funding to buy land and also for our operations, for our activities. We work together with Fonds du Logement, which is a social housing agencies, which provides mortgages for our homeowners. And there are plenty community organizations that help us organize our community and prepare our buildings. And then lots of municipalities are also interested and keen in working with us. And very often they provide us land for an interesting, affordable price. And this is just to show also the community involvement. This is our annual general meeting, which is every year a very important moment for us. As Community Land Trust Brussels, we are also very much involved in the emerging European CLT movement. We initiated a European project funded by Interact Northwest Europe that is called SHIC. And the aim of this project is to promote the CLT model and has been very successful up to now, because when we started with CLT Brussels in 2012, we were the only CLT in mainland Europe. In the meantime, in France, there have been a lot of OFS, which is the French version of CLTs, but also in cities as Amsterdam or Berlin, there are groups emerging in Scotland, in Ireland. So this is really a very strong movement, and we feel indeed that CLTs can be a part of the answer of the crisis that Sorcha described before my presentation. It might be of interest to you that we also have created a startup fund. So if there are people among you who are interested in creating a community land trust, it is possible to get some seed money to do feasibility study. So the future prospects of our CLT is, of course, scaling up, because we think that our formula can be an answer for a lot of families in housing need today in Brussels. Something else is to strengthen our legal framework through legal recognition by the regional government, and also through specific lease contracts tailor-made for our kind of operations. Something else is that we are working on community financing models, whereas today we mainly work with subsidies. we also want to look for private equity, citizens' investments to secure land through a land cooperative. This land cooperative is in the creation, and it is composed by different other associations, among whom different associations working with homeless. And the idea is that we can use the CLT formula to do all kind of other developments, not only home ownership for low-income groups, as we do today, but also, for instance, housing for the homeless, space for social economic businesses, community centers, etc. And that is the end of my presentation. Thanks a lot for your attention.
Thank you very much, Geert, for this very interesting presentation. I don't see any questions yet, but I wanted to first give the opportunity to the remaining panelists if they had any reactions or any questions that they would like to ask. So I see, yes, Paul.
Yes, please. Can you hear me?
Go ahead.
Okay, yeah, 2 questions, if I may. First of all, I'm very interested in the governance of the trust, because you had that balanced model of 3 different groups. And I wonder if there's been any tension between those groups, because they might have differing views about how the trust land should be used and the future. So there's that question about tension in governance. And my second question is, how do people progress? How do people move on? Because if they've got cheap accommodation through this model, is it possible for them to move on somewhere else eventually, because they've obviously got something which is very beneficial to them, and it might be difficult for them to move into more expensive accommodation or purchase a property elsewhere?
Okay, thank you. Those are 2 very good questions. The first one, for me, one of the real successes of what we do is exactly this governance structure. Although we do, in the beginning, we were doubtful if it would be possible, especially because, well, there are very, very different kinds of people who are in our board. We have a board that is composed of 15 people. 5 of them are of residents or future residents. 5 of them are people mainly from associations, neighborhood and community associations, and 5 of them are representatives of the regional government. And there is a huge difference in skills and in vision also, but mainly in skills between these future residents. So lots of whom really have not have no higher education. Some of them really difficulties with the French language, and then on the other side, these representatives of the government who are used to who spend their days doing this kind of meetings. So this was really a big challenge, and up to now, there haven't been, I say, almost any tension, because if I go back to all our meetings, we never had to do voting. So we always found well, an agreement on everything. The most interesting thing in it is that even though indeed there is a difference in skills of in this kind of meetings, you feel that all parties know that with the others around the table, when they take decisions, they have to take account of the other party, and that is really one of the biggest successes, I think. And So if anything, if people ask me what should we take over of your way of doing this, this is really something really key for me, this governance model. Although it's very challenging, and you have to invest in it, you have to give trainings to the people who are in the board, etc. And then the other question: how do people progress? Well, first of all, one of the things that are important for us is that people have the possibility to stay in our homes, even if, or maybe especially if the situation becomes better. This is also a factor of success, I think. If we can, if we see that people want to stay in our homes, it's a very good sign. And for instance, our first project is now occupied since 4 years. A lot of the families have very much improved their situation. They found jobs, their income increased, and also, of course, a lot of the families changed, and the people got more children, for instance, and some of them were looking for homes, and all of them really were very interested in buying other homes within our park at a higher price, because we use prices adapted to the income of the people. So for me, that's really very important. It's also a way of how shall I say that, creating one of the main elements in urban policy has always been, in Brussels anyway, has been to create a social mix by attracting higher income groups. Well, I think that what we do makes it possible for low income groups to get a stake in the community, stay in the community, and then when their situation becomes better, giving them the possibility to stay also. This being said, it is also possible, although we have indeed limited resale prices. The idea is that with this price, people at least probably they won't be able to buy entirely to buy without mortgage a new home on the private market, but this the resale price will help them to at least pay an important down payment, and will make it much more easier to get mortgage to buy on the private market. But up to now, this hasn't happened yet.
So we have some questions coming in. I'm going to give you 2 of them, and we will maybe be able to do some more during the general Q&A. So we have a question from Jane. She is asking, how local are the occupants? Are they already personally connected to each other? And from Esther, how is the income adjusted price defined? What share of income is spent on the monthly installments?
Okay.
And she also was wondering what loans are available for CLTs. So if you could answer those, and then we will get a move on the.
Yeah. Okay. Again, 2 great questions. The first one, how local are the residents? In our case, there are community land trusts who are really local and work with people from one single neighborhood. In our case, well, first of all, we develop projects in different municipalities, and also that's also the case for the residents. Our future residents live all over Brussels, If we have a new project, so people who want to buy homes have to become a member of our association. And when there's a new project, at the beginning of the project, we organize a call. Everyone who's eligible can, or every member can candidate for this home. And then we'll see who's the longest on the waiting list, in fact. So these people in the beginning don't know each other and don't necessarily have links to the neighborhood in which we will build. Of course, they have the possibility. It's always a choice. We will never impose people to go and live in a neighborhood, but at the beginning, most of the people don't know each other, don't choose to live with each other neither, such as it is as it happens in typical co-housing projects. But the day they move to their new homes, they already know very well their future neighbors, because throughout the process, and mostly it's between 2 and 3 years of preparation of the project, we organize very regularly, almost every month, meetings with the future residents, in which we discuss how life will be organized in these homes. We provide trainings. We use it also to organize social activities and activities with the neighborhood, such as the flea market I showed you, etc. So I hope this is an answer to the first question. And the second one, in fact, I hope it's a little bit technical, but we have defined. The question was which share of the income and how affordable is it? We have defined 4 income groups. So as I said, our target group are people who are eligible for social housing, but the difference in income between the very lowest incomes and people who are just eligible, it goes from half to double. So it is not enough to set a price that is affordable for the highest of these incomes. So we have 4 different types of price, and these prices, the maximum prices, are for each type of apartment. So that means that we have 4 categories: A, B, C, D. D being the lowest and A being the highest, and then maximum prices for single bedroom apartments, 2 rooms apartments, etc. And these prices are calculated for each of these income groups, make it possible to spend not more than 1/3 of the available income to housing. And then the loans. Well, we have an agreement with the social bank, the Fonds du Logement, that provides mortgages, social mortgages, at an interesting interest rate. But we also work since recently with private bank Triodos that also is willing to provide mortgages for our homeowners. I hope that was clear.
Yes, thank you very much. We've had some more questions coming in, but I am going to move on, and we will hopefully be able to address those in the general Q&A. So our next speaker is, sorry, before I say this, to anyone who might be new to this webinar software, as participants, you are muted, and so you can put your questions in writing using the questions tab. I know that the different webinar softwares can work differently sometimes, but please do use the questions tab to your right. So our next speaker is Paul Doe from the Shepherd's Bush Housing Association, where he was previously Chief Executive. He is going to tell us about a project that is also in our 50 Solutions publication called Let's Build in the Air. It is a project that aims to solve two problems simultaneously: the shortage of available land that can be used for affordable housing in expensive areas such as London, where Shepherd's Bush is based, and also the often poor quality of community facilities that lack long-term resilience. So Paul, the floor is yours.
Thank you. Can you see my presentation? Has it appeared? Yes?
Yes.
Yeah. Yes, good. Okay, yes, I'm going to talk about a concept that we developed when I was at Shepherd's Bush Housing Group. I call it building in the air because basically one of the concerns that we had was that there was a severe shortage of land in West London, in particular where we operated, but we also had buildings that we felt were underutilized. So I will begin by just first of all highlighting that acute shortage of land. West London is a very difficult area in which to build. It's already heavily developed. There is very little brown land, as it's called. We also have an awful lot of conservation areas where people seek to protect where they currently live and don't want too much development in the future. The cost of land is extraordinarily high. We are looking at each individual home, a flat or whatever, having a land cost alone of probably £120,000, so about 130,000, 140,000 euros per property. So it's extraordinarily difficult to find land that is reasonably priced, that can be developed by housing associations so that we can provide rented housing. The other issue that West London and many areas have are some very poor quality community facilities. Very often these were built in the 60s or 70s, often on estates owned by councils. They are very often single-story buildings. They've had very little investment since they were first built. They struggle for viability. Very often they're run by small community groups who have no prospect themselves of being able to bring money in to improve the building and are themselves concerned about their long-term future. Many of them are actually owned by the councils themselves, and they charge a rent for the buildings, or a very low rent, but then also expects the community facility to help with costs of maintenance and the like. Now, many of these facilities are often in key sites. They're very good sites in the centre of parts of West London, and they're often underusing land. They often are just single-story buildings. Some of them are just what we call porter cabins, and they are deteriorating quite rapidly. So the idea that we had was quite simply to reuse the facilities and put new housing on top. Quite a simple concept, but one that actually takes a while to resolve. But what we wanted to try and do was convince people that they had a long-term benefit in allowing us to use their community buildings by giving them the long-term freehold ownership, or a concept that we have in Britain called leasehold, a long-term leasehold ownership for those community groups. That would give them a stake in the future. They would be able to see that they could build themselves and acquire investment as well for themselves, go out and fundraise if they could, because they actually could retain the building, a new building for themselves into the long term. The key for us was to provide them with good quality new facilities. Not simply take the building as it currently was, but completely refurbish it so that it was offering something really exciting to the new community. The other issue for us was that many of these community buildings, from a planning point of view and a valuation point of view, often had a lower site value. So if we were going to retain the community facility, when it came to valuing that land, and that was key for us, it would have a lower value than if the site was to go purely for residential housing use. This gave us the opportunity to take that site value, to refurbish or renew the building, and using grant from our own housing investment area and our loans to actually build on top, build homes on top, flats on top in good locations. Also, the housing association would then be able to offer to the community facility the opportunity for the whole building to be maintained in the long run, so that the whole thing, the ground floor didn't deteriorate in a way that was different to the way in which the top floors of the building were being maintained. So that was important as well, because it gave the community facility the opportunity to buy into, which they had to pay for, but they had to buy into our maintenance services to run the whole building. So I've just showed a few examples of how this has been done in West London. This is an old school, in fact, in Fulham, a very expensive part of West London. The school was given to a local community group who wanted to convert it into a building that could house voluntary organisations who would pay small rents to actually all be located in the same building. They didn't have the money to do it. They had the school, they had the building, they acquired the building, but that was it. They had no skills and no money to actually refurbish it. So we came along and we said to them, we will help you to refurbish the ground floor of the building if we can take the top floor and build, as you can see, an interesting building on top to provide 20 flats throughout the whole building. That's now been in operation for quite a few years. The whole ground floor is taken by community organisations who take different parts of the building and then work together as different community groups. And on top, we have flats available for, as we call them, intermediate level flats for people, young people who are working in Fulham. So that's worked out very well indeed. This is something called the Irish Centre, and it's quite an iconic building right on what's called the Hammersmith Broadway in the centre of Hammersmith and Fulham Borough. It's quite a busy area, but on the ground floor there was a small building, much smaller building, which was owned by an Irish group, an Irish cultural group, who used to provide services to the Irish community, but also music and arts facilities. The council owned the site, and they decided that they wanted to charge a market rent to the Irish Centre or sell it to the Irish Centre. They simply didn't have the money. It was impossible. So they faced permanent closure, that they would lose the building altogether. So again, we came to them with the concept of building in the air and said to them, if we could demolish the current site and rebuild with the Irish Centre on the ground floor, you can see the two darker floors at the bottom there, completely building them a new facility, and then we built 25 flats on top in the centre of a very expensive area in which to live and to rent, 25 flats for affordable rent through the association. So that has now been completed, as you can see. The Irish Centre themselves went out and fundraised to refit the building. We provided the shell. Because of the cost of it all, we could just provide the shell. The Irish Centre fundraised across Europe, in fact, to help with the refitting of the building. It's been formally opened and all the flats are now let. This is a sketch of a scheme that is actually being constructed right now. It's a much smaller scheme. It's a site on the edge of a council estate. It was the sort of building that I was talking about, a very poor quality, single-story community facility that was underused, but the local community group from the estate certainly wanted to try and improve it, but didn't have the resources. The council had no money to invest in it. We came to them with the idea that we would give them a new community centre on the ground floor, and above we worked with a local housing organisation called Yarrow to provide 7 flats for people with learning difficulties on the top floor and 7 flats for rent for Shepherd's Bush as well. So effectively 3 different uses: flats for rent, flats for people with learning disabilities, and on the ground floor a community facility for all people who live on the estate, completely improved, brand new facility. And for them, it guarantees them the building for the future as well. So that's being built right now, as is this one. This one is also being built. This is a larger scheme. It was the site of, owned by the council, it was the site of a former housing office, which they decided was surplus to requirements. A group called Action on Disability, which operates in Hammersmith and Fulham, again this is in Fulham, was looking for a new home. They were actually being made homeless by the council themselves, who were taking back their building, and Action on Disability had nowhere to go to. So we joined forces with them and went to the council and said to them, why don't we work together to provide a building that provides a brand new, fully disability friendly ground floor building for the charity Action on Disability, and we put 30 flats for shared ownership and rent on top of the building. This is now being built right now, should be completed this year, but it's a very exciting prospect because it gives the charity something which they have never had before, you know, a building that is completely disability friendly. That means that they can get whoever they wish to come into the building, and they can operate their charity from it. They get that building provided, again, the building itself is provided free of charge, and they have it on a long leasehold. So they have guaranteed their future. They no longer have to worry about being evicted in the future, because they can have it, it will be looked after and have their own long-term investment in it. So I just want to finish just by pointing out a few things that are needed in this sort of thing. We have to have good partnerships in place. The partnerships have to work with the community groups. There has to be a sense of trust, that we're working well together. In each of those cases, each of them are different. You can see there are 4 different community groups there. None of them have the great experience and skills about development and how it should work. So we have to sign a development agreement with them that have to take them through the process so they understand how it works. It's very important that we have a sensible valuation and planning process in this. There is no point in coming up with a community facility for the council then to say, oh, well, actually it should be valued at full market residential value. We have to be sensible with the council, so there's a corporate will with the association, with the councils as well, and also with our planning department to ensure that we can build a reasonable number of flats above without overcrowding the sites, but a reasonable number of flats above to make sure that the whole scheme is viable and that we can then afford to build the building beneath. And we actually have to work with community groups that have a long-term future in mind. So we are looking for people who see a long-term future, want to work with their local communities, see that they are well grounded and that they are not going to disappear in 5 years' time or struggle for future investment. They have to have a willingness themselves to fundraise, because we can't provide the money for all of the fitting out of all of these buildings. And very often they can do that because they now have a long-term prospect for their own particular community site. So there we are. I think that is it. Yes, thank you. Happy to take questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Paul. It's great to hear more about this project in detail, having read about it in our publication. We have two questions for you from the audience, so I'm going to give both of them and you can answer. From Ruth, I mean, we all know London is an extremely expensive city, so she's wondering how affordable exactly are the rents in these flats? And then from Anna, what determines the size of the building, i.e. the number of apartments that get built on top? Why not build higher when the land price is so high?
Yeah. Yes. All of the rents that we have for these properties are set at affordable rent levels. Because we're taking grant from the government, we have to operate within a grant setting regime. So the rents are what we call affordable levels, which are always at a level of 80% below the market rent, 80% level. We often, with some boroughs, try and keep them lower than that. And the way in which we can do that is by arguing with them about the valuation of the land. So for instance, with Hammersmith and Fulham are very good at working with us on trying to keep rents low. So if we can show them a viability model that shows that if you value the land at X a little bit lower down than where it would normally be, that we will be able to lower the rents. So we show them the model that says we need this amount of money to be able to pay for this community building. We need this amount of money to be able to provide the flats. Now, that also relates, of course, to the second question about how many flats we can put on top of each block. And there is no doubt that if we were able to go up another floor or 2 floors above some of the buildings that we have put forward, that would make them more viable and that we may well be able to reduce rent levels. But that is a balance. That is always a balance between discussions with the local community about how the type of building that we're building, the impact that building will have on the community and the environment, and how it fits in generally from a planning perspective. So there is always a balance to be struck. But you know, we have, I myself have had discussions. I'm a planning officer by training, and I myself have had discussions with planners arguing that one more floor on top of a building would not upset the environment or upset the dynamic with the local community. So there's often a discussion where we come in with a scheme that where we have a floor knocked off in planning because they simply feel that it is a little bit too high. But that is always an issue for us. We don't want to build tower blocks everywhere, but we do want to build them so that we can keep rents low and make the property viable. Thank you.
Thank you. Geert or Sergio, happy to take any questions or reactions from you.
Sorry. Yes. May I ask? Thank you for the nice presentation, Paul. My question is, can you clarify a bit, please, which is the tenure regime of those people living in those flats? Are they leaseholders? Are they freeholders? Are they tenants at all? And also, do they own the land or a piece of land or a percentage of the land, or they do not? Thank you.
In 3 of the 4 schemes I showed you, apart from the last one, they are all rented. They all rent. So they don't have an interest in the land. They are pure rent. Because there's an acute shortage of good rented accommodation in West London. So we want to try and build as many rented homes as possible. In the final scheme I showed you above the disability building, there are a number of flats there that are shared ownership. Perhaps I should go to it. I can go back to it, can't I? I'll show you that. 1 second. Here, there are a number of flats that are shared ownership. So people will buy an interest, a concept I'm sure you're all familiar with. In fact, I think you'll talk about it later. A concept where people will buy an interest 30% initially or 50% to start, and then they will scale up and buy more. But they will always have a leasehold interest. They will never have a freehold interest because they're flats. That's how it works. Thank you.
Thank you.
And I have another question. Do you provide solutions for the associations during the construction phase? Because that seems to be one of the difficulties to realize this kind of projects, no?
Solutions?
Yes, do you provide other space that they can use during the construction? Or?
Yeah, yes, interesting one, yes. We have not been able to do that other than on this particular case where I think a small porter cabin was provided to help the local people to continue to operate the community facility. But that is a difficulty because we are building in the air. So we don't have any spare land available to put a lot of the buildings around it. We have to use the plot that we are actually faced with. So it is very difficult for us to replace the facility. This one here, the charity continued to use the previous building that they were being evicted from until such time as they could move. So that was good. And the Irish Centre here, they had to move out and use alternative buildings that were scattered around the area to carry on doing their facilities, but they were happy to do that. And in this particular one, no work had been done at all to the ground floor. So the community associations were all in their existing buildings waiting for this one to be completed before they could move in. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Thanks a lot, Paul. There will perhaps be more questions during the general session. I will now move on to Sergio. So last but not least, we're going to hear from Sergio Nazari-Aznar. He is a full professor of civil law and director of the UNESCO Housing Chair at the University Rovira i Virgili in Tarragona in Spain. And he developed a law that passed in 2015 in the Catalan government. It allows people to overcome problems of over-indebtedness. And although he will, of course, tell you more, it consists of the fractioning of ownership by shares or by time to make it more accessible and more affordable. So Sergio, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I will try to share my screen now, if it works. Does it work, or can you see that?
Yes. Perfect.
Okay, great. Okay, that's great. So thank you very much for this kind invitation, and thank you for all these interesting presentations. This topic I'm going to talk about shares some issues with the presentations we have already heard, but some others are different. For example, shared ownership and temporal ownership in the way they have been implemented into Catalan law since 2015, for example, don't need any kind of public support, any kind of public money to work. You don't need to provide ground to anybody, you don't need to give subsidies to anybody. I mean, I am talking about a legal framework, which basically it's relatively free to create a law, a piece of legislation, and it's a sort of toolbox that sellers, buyers, developers can use to promote these affordable and democratic, I may say, types of home ownership. Basically, this piece of legislation was promoted by our housing chair some years ago in our daily work of research, lecturing, transfer of knowledge, and creating this social impact that you were talking about. Basically, we have been involved in several projects, European projects that have helped us to frame these new types of ownership, because we have to bear in mind that this new type of tenures haven't existed in Spain since the times of Napoleon, and still don't exist in many civil law countries. I mean, it is 80% of Europe, because at that time, at the end of the 18th century, beginning of the 19th century, the French code simply said that ownership was either full or nothing, which means that either you can become homeowner or you are a tenant. That's it. So we have broken this rule, inspired by English legislation from the Middle Ages, the leasehold and the shared ownership. It has been just mentioned in this example, in this development in that piece by Paul, and also being inspired by this temporal ownership as a sort of way of holding the land as a modernized system from the Middle Ages. So basically, first I want to address which is the role of intermediate tenures, understood as types of tenures that fit in between home ownership or full home ownership and tenancies. Second thing is the conundrum of access to housing that Europe is facing since 2007, and especially after the coronavirus crisis. And then I will address some details about this shared ownership and temporal ownership in Catalonia and how they can help to solve these problems or this situation. As it is already known, the housing bubble of 2007 was mainly due to this widespread or uncontrolled widespread of home ownership as an American dream, and also combined with this reckless mortgage securitization throughout the world. So it is being said, or since yes, UNICE, but also you see here some European reports. Also, FEANSA was involved in by the way, and also this Habitat 3 new urban agenda also mentioned that concentrating all your efforts as a country in a single type of tenure is a bad idea. For example, in this point 33 of a new urban agenda, it says we commit to stimulate the supply of a variety of adequate housing options that are safe, affordable, and accessible for members for all members of different income groups of society. So the reality is basically that we are pushed as researchers, as stakeholders, as social movements, as policymakers, as housing lobbies, to stimulate and to create new types of housing tenures, alternative housing tenures. That's why this webinar of today is so adequate, and it fits perfectly to the hopes and interests of the world community to try to offer different types of tenures to different types and expectations and possibilities of households. So I think that it is no longer true, especially since the 2007 crisis, but also with the coronavirus crisis, that one type of tenure does not fit all, which means that we have to think about, like the community land trust we have already heard, like this building on the earth thing, combining leaseholds and freeholds and shared ownerships and tenancies and so on and so forth. So try to offer as many types of tenures as possible, because the crisis, as it is already known by the audience for sure, has brought so many problems to many European countries, not only to Southern European countries. I have combined here, I have gathered here some data saying that countries like, for example, Germany or Belgium or France or Sweden or Finland don't have reliable data on evictions or homelessness. And also Denmark, for example, is the country in Europe that evicts people the fastest, in 36 days, or where more people live alone in their homes, this kind of thing. So I think housing issues are not only a private thing of Southern Europe. You remember this acronym of PICS we were given by the by the experts in 2008 or something like that. So the idea is that this should be a general effort, because the process that brought us to the 2007 crisis, I mean, has led us to a similar problem today, a similar crisis. So, which is basically a conundrum, sort of labyrinth that nobody exactly knows how to get out of it. So we have this economic and housing boom since during the 1980s until 2000s. Home ownership has been the most widespread type of tenure in Europe, without any exception made only by the United Kingdom. But because you have decreased the protection of tenants, and you are offering tenancies of 6 months, for example, and then that's why you have had so many problems now with the coronavirus, for example. So every other country in Europe have increased their home ownership ratio, which means that home ownership is the most desired type of tenure in Europe. It's not a private thing, neither by the Southern Europeans. It's a common sense that people is a common intention or common interest that if you can afford buying a home, you will or you want to. So, and this is data gathered by Professor Whitehead and so on in several works. So in 2007 came the crisis, and then the gurus, the housing gurus, traditional one, says, okay, solution for everything is social rented housing. Problem that the universalistic model, for example, in Denmark or in the Netherlands, have faced challenges from European Commission and also from the European Court of Justice as recent as in 2018, saying your model distorts the competence in Europe, so you have to reduce it, and you have to focus the social housing for people that really need it, and then you can compete with advantages with the private market. And then you go to the targeted social rented housing model, and then we realize, and we already know, that it's cyclical. It only works when the economy works, but that at that time nobody wants it, because everybody is rich and everybody wants a big chalet and things like that, and don't want to live in social housing. But then when a crisis comes and they need the house, so it's cyclical, which means that basically there is no public money to buy anything or to build anything new. So, for example, in some countries like in France, in Spain, and some others, have started to force landlords and owners or homeowners, saying with empty properties, saying, okay, either you put it in social housing, or we will punish you, and we will increase your taxes, and you will be expropriated. For example, in Catalonia, we have a recent decree, which is from January this year, saying that if you squat up an empty property and there is no other housing available, and you are vulnerable, you can stay in that property legally up to 6 months. So it's the first time in Spain that we have legalized squatting. So this is one perspective, one approach. Second approach is home ownership, but of course, as I have already mentioned, home ownership has been sort of cause of the whole economic crisis of 2007. And then we have two options. We have two ways. First thing is to collaborate. And we have many examples, very nice examples of collaborative housing. For example, this community land trust we have already heard, that combines this idea of stability homes and democratic decision taking. But we have some examples that don't work basically, and they are a way of precarization of housing tenures. And we think as a housing institute that this is not the way to go. And this is where the intermediate tenures come. Like, for example, this shared ownership and temporal ownership that we have introduced in Catalonia in 2015. And we have the rented housing. We say, okay, the alternative can be to rent a house. Problem for that is that if you force everybody to rent, you get to a tenancy bubble, which is a reality since the housing crisis in many, I may say, big cities or international cities in Europe. It is a problem in New York, it's a problem in Berlin, it's a problem in Paris, it's a problem in London, it's in Barcelona, in Madrid, in Rome, in Milano. So it's an international issue that if there is no possibility to access to home ownership and you don't have functional alternative housing tenures, and you force everybody to rent, then you have problems. And then started a sort of pendular changing of legislation in Europe. Many countries have changed their tenancy legislation, trying to make experiments if they help on that, and they are making the problem worse and worse. And then again, the solution is okay, share or collaborate, or try to find some sort of balanced tenancies. That is our approach, but this is not the topic of today. And also, we think that a solution can come from using technology and housing. But let's concentrate in this in intermediate tenures, as mentioned before. They fall in between private renting housing and full ownership. They exist in several countries. They're quite scattered, and the schemes may vary from one to each other. I have gathered some information here of some of the countries: the United Kingdom and the Netherlands. These are the two that we got inspired when we introduced this legislation in Catalonia. But they exist in Ireland, in Malta, in Australia, in Finland. But you can realize here that they have sort of most of them are common law systems, which is a more flexible framework for private law, I may say. So it's a framework which is more friendly to manipulate home ownership and to make it more flexible. So the challenge was how to introduce this flexibility of home ownership into civil law countries, which are the vast majority countries in the world. So first we have to challenge Napoleon. You see the picture of Napoleon here. And we try to convince all professors and so on, and politicians and so on, saying, okay, it's important thing that we have to go for alternative housing tenures, functional ones, but at the same time combining the aspirations, the wills of people, which are natural, for example, in contexts of relatively weak welfare states, to become homeowners, but in an affordable way, in a sustainable way, not giving them only the possibility of full or nothing, but trying to help them to staircase up to home ownership. And of course, we came up with this scheme that exists in the United Kingdom since the 1980s in a very similar context like the one in 2007 and the following years because of the crisis, and a very relatively similar system, environment that we are going to find maybe after this coronavirus crisis. And basically, the scheme says that you can become a homeowner since the beginning of the scheme. So you can become a homeowner and act as a homeowner, even if you only buy a piece, a share, a percentage of the property. Let us say in this example I have provided you here, it's just buying 25% of the property, which means basically that if you out of this 25%, you pay 5% with your savings, for example, in this example, and you take a mortgage of 20%, which means basically that you become homeowner of the 25%, but in fact you work and you live as a full homeowner for the whole property. So the only right that is retained by the seller is to get a rent, a sort of rent, for the rest of the ownership of the shares that are not bought by the buyer. So this 75%. So basically, means that, for example, for a 100,000 euros property, for example, to make it easy, you can there is only a need for you to have savings beforehand of 5,000 euros, and your mortgage, instead of being of 80,000 euros, will be of 20,000 euros, and for the rest you pay a rent. And usually it is not a market rent. You can subsidize this if you wish, but there is no need for that, as I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. But it's a soft rent because basically there is no risk of default, or there is very much less risk of default or misbehaving with the property, because you are owner, and because you're owner, you will take care of it, and you will pay attention of paying it, and so on and so forth. So basically, usually this rent is lower than a usual rent of a tenancy contract. So all in all, these are some details here. Because of the time, I'm not sure if I can cover all of them. But basically, means that the buyer owns the part of the property it has already paid, either with savings or with a mortgage, but it can act as a full owner of the whole property. He can change the furniture. She can paint the walls. She can sell the property, so the share of the property, and then the buyer subrogates in her position, and the scheme goes on. She takes part in the condominium meetings, for example. She has the exclusive enjoyment of the property, but at the same time, of course, she takes all the expenses and taxes regarding the property, because she enjoys it 100%. She pays 100% of the expenses and taxes. She can make any alterations, and also she has a right to increase the share. Let us say, for example, she has bought this 25% or a 10% or a 85%, whatever the money she has and is affordable to her, either by savings again or through a mortgage loan. But she has the right to scale up, to staircase up until 100%. And also she can agree to staircase down with the seller, but it's an option. It's optional. Yes. Regarding the formal owner, which is the seller, as I said before, she has only the right to get an upfront payment of this 25%, 10%, 85%, whatever the share that is bought by the buyer. He or she can dispose of the quota of the share she holds. Let us say he or she needs money instantly, so there is a market also for that. And also there are some exceptions with the repair works, which are for example, in case they are risking the stability of the property. In regard to the duration of the scheme, it can last up to 99 years, but if nothing is agreed, is 30 years. And finally, it is created by a public deed. It is usually created by a public deed through a notary, but there is no need for that. Here are some very basic numbers comparing, for example, this example that was created by María José Soler some years ago in relation to a household earning 2,000 euros per month. 4-people household earning 2,000 euros per month, and a flat of 72 square meters, something like that, with this price, and no public subsidies. So if we compare, which is their monthly effort, so which share of their income they have to devote to the payment of the house. If they buy it through shared ownership, it will only be 33%. Very similar as if they were tenants, but you see the difference here with the full ownership. So it is much higher, which means basically that shared ownership is a sustainable way to become homeowner and requires similar effort as being a tenant. We have here also the second institution, the temporal ownership. Temporal ownership as a concept is easier to understand. Simply means that since 2015 in Catalonia, you can, and just for the properties in Catalonia, it hasn't been extended to the whole of Spain, you can become homeowner for a number of years, just for a number of years, which means the number of years, for example, you need the property. Let's imagine you were born in a little village in the countryside, and you have, when you are 35, you have to move for labor reasons to a bigger city, but you don't want to become a tenant, and you don't know because you don't want to have a landlord, and landlord changing the rent every 5 or 3 years or whatever, or increasing the rent and so on, and you buy it right now for the number of years you foresee that you will work in that big city. When you retire, you will like to go to your little village, and that's it. And then, for example, let us say you need it for 20 years or 10 years, whatever the number of years you are planning to stay in that city, and then you come up with these numbers these numbers were done by Lorcan and Sir, a research in the Technical Institute of Dublin in 2017, and you realize that buying temporarily buying a property in Catalonia means that you can save, you see here, up to 300 euros per month if you buy it upfront with a mortgage instead of renting it. So it not only it is much more affordable than renting a property, but also you become homeowner, which means that, of course, if you die, you can give it as inheritance to your heirs. You can sell it freely to anybody for the remaining number of years that the property stands still. You see here the number of years you have to agree between 10 years and 99 years. It is less flexible than for example, the leasehold in the United Kingdom, which can last for hundreds of years. Usually it is about 125 or something like that, but we have limited it to 99 years. We have to bear in mind that it's the first time in more than 200 years that there is a big change in the structure of ownership in a civil law country. So we have to go step by step. So basically, these are more or less some of the features of this institution. Basically, I have covered some or many of them. Basically, the only one that I have missed is that when the time expires. So, for example, let's imagine you have bought it for 40 years. So when the year number 40 comes, there is a free reversal of the temporal ownership to the one that sold it to you or the person that holds this title. Let us say that the person that sold you the property died and there is a heir, so you have to return this, or it is returned automatically to the heir of the seller. Also, there is another interesting thing that we have allowed the creation of subtemporal ownerships, which means that, for example, if you hold the property for 20 years, you can sell it for 10 years to a third party, which means that when this 10 years expire, it goes back to you. You can enjoy it for the next 10 years, and then 10 years, and then is reversed to the seller. And also it can be used successively, which means that, for example, let's imagine you have only one property and you have three heirs, three sons or three daughters, yes, and you love them the same. So you love 33% the first one, 33% the second one, and the 33% the third one. But there is also this little percentage that this is the 33.3333. So you love more the first one because it's the first one. So what you can do when you have only one property, which what can you do? What can you do in your testament? What you can say, for example, in your will, you can say, okay, this property will be enjoyed by the first one, the first 10 years. Next 10 years will be enjoyed by the second, by my second son or my second daughter, and for the other 10 years it will be enjoyed by my third son. But then when this time comes up, the property will go back, will reverse to the first son, which I love the most, forever. So the property will be enjoyed by each of your heirs, but it will go to your lowest, basically. So of course, if you are the owner of the property and you can sell it freely and you can give an inheritance freely and so on, you can change it freely for anything, and you have to take care of the reparations as well. You have to pay the taxes as well, and you have a regime of damages. Let us say, for example, that the end of the temporal ownership is coming, and then you become nervous because, for example, you haven't bought an option to get the eternal right of ownership of the property, and you have to give it back, and then you suddenly say, okay, I will destroy the property before I will give it back. Okay, you will be liable for that, for damages, and you you have to pay for the damages you create. And of course, we have to bear in mind it's a completely anti-speculative model, because if you only hold the property for 30 years or 40 years, every day, every week, every month that goes by, the property is worth less. So there is no point basically in investing in temporal ownership property if you are not going to live in. Also, finally, you can combine temporal ownership and shared ownership as well. So you can create shared ownership on the top of temporal ownership, which basically fractions and divides the prices, the market, the values a lot, and gives much more opportunities, or many more opportunities, to every type of household. So as I mentioned before, this shared ownership model that we were inspired was born in the United Kingdom in 1980. Since then, 25% of shared buyers became full homeowners. So they have staircased up. These 25% of buyers have scaled up to this 100%. So this shows clearly that this is a way of becoming full homeowner in a sustainable way, without being over indebted, without risking too much in evictions and the possibility of paying the loans back or the rent back. Nowadays, there are 200,000 households in the United Kingdom that are shared owners. Paul has mentioned one of the schemes that is using this shared ownership scheme, and basically this system uses less than half public money in the United Kingdom than social renting. As I mentioned before, this can be even used without any support of public money. In Catalonia, there are some developments on that. There are some pieces of legislation here and so on and so forth. There are many stakeholders that are promoting it and widespreading their use. But one of the most recent uses for these schemes have been, for example, that the Catalan government has a legal preemption right, a first refusal right to any property that is going to be taken back by banks do an eviction, and the Catalan government has the right to buy it before any other third party. So what the Catalan government is doing with these properties that is getting through the system is to selling them temporarily, so very affordable, to little municipalities, NGOs, and so on, that otherwise will not be able to afford buying a full ownership of that property. And then these municipalities and so on are giving them as social are letting these properties as for social tenants, which means that basically you see here a chain from full ownership and an evicted person to through a temporal ownership that goes to little municipalities and NGOs that are using them for social tenants. This is one of the big successes of the scheme so far. And as I have mentioned in the whole presentation, concentrating in a single, as a conclusion, concentrating simply on a type of tenure is a bad idea. The social housing is insufficient, and where it is sufficient, it is limited by law. Because distorts competition. We have these tenancies in many countries are stigmatized. In many places and cities and neighborhoods are unaffordable. There is pendular legislation, which also entails any sort of legal uncertainty and increases their prices, and landlords don't like them very much, saying, okay, many changes on law, very complicated. They always even like to keep their properties empty. We have unattainable homeownership, especially since, for example, this I haven't mentioned before, this directive 214/17 that says that stipulates so many requirements to prospective homeowners to fulfill, that barely only the most affluent will be able to be granted a mortgage in many countries. There are very sad examples in Malta, for example, where NGOs are paying people to be able to get mortgages because they cannot fulfill the requirements of the directive. Something is beginning to happen also in Spain, for example. So homeownership has become unattainable for the less affluent, and I think that here these intermediate tenures that provide for this sustainable way and democratic way of becoming homeowners are or can be a part of the solution. In any case, thank you very much for your time, and that's it.
Thank you very much, Sergio, for such a rich presentation. I will immediately give you a question that came in before letting the other panelists ask. So Julie Lawson was wondering, I think you touched on this briefly, but she was wondering, how are long-term maintenance costs when you have fractional tenures? How do you deal with long-term maintenance costs? How are they planned for and funded? And has this model been able to avoid some of the problems of multiple ownerships that other countries have experienced, such as the LP, so the housing associations in Austria and the UK?
Yeah, I mean, for the long-term expenditure and expenses, we have gone to a very simple rule, which means saying, well, there is a, well, it's simple and it's historical because it comes from Roman law. It says, so it's 2,000 years ago, not to 200 like Napoleon, so it goes back to 2,000 years ago. It says, ubi emolumentum ibi onus, which means where the enjoyment is, there is the responsibility as well. So, which means that if you enjoy the property 100%, even if you only hold 5% of the property, you take care of the whole property, taxes, expenses, and so on and so forth. So this is and also this is very straightforward. That is very simple rule. If we plan, for example, to share the expenses according to the shares, but it will be a complete chaos, and it will not fulfill this Roman law rule, which is very clear and crystal clear and straightforward. So this is one thing, and the other thing is, well, so far we are not aware of any special problems in fractioning ownership. We were aware of some problems in housing associations in the United Kingdom, like for example, this person that couldn't, I remember a case that that she couldn't afford paying the rent, the rental part of the whole scheme, and she was able to be evicted because of that, and losing her part of ownership that she has already bought. For making the whole scheme safer in our system, we stipulated that the rent is warranted by the part you already hold, which means that basically if you default in paying the rent, you will be also taking out the property, the share of property you already own, although the person that takes that in an auction, for example, will subrogate in this position and will pay you the difference, the difference, so the money that the difference between the amount you own because of the rent and the value of the property you held. So you don't lose money basically. So you have consolidated your part of the property. Yes.
Thank you. Gert, I think you had your hand raised, so floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you for this presentation, which was really very interesting. I have two questions. One is one that we receive very frequently, so I would like to address it to you also. That is that when Napoleon installed civil law, that was there was a reason for it. It was a reaction to the feudal system. So, is what you are doing here are you not imposing an inferior model of ownership for those who cannot afford real ownership? And then the second question is, how is it anti-speculative? I do understand that this kind of models are not interesting for pure speculants, but on the other hand, I don't think it contributes to controlling real estate price, or do I see that wrong?
Okay, thank you very much for your question. Technically, it's not an inferior type of ownership. If you ask any English lawyer if leasehold is an inferior type of ownership than freehold, they will say, well, basically no. The difference is only timing. Yes, it means you are the full owner for a number of years. Yes. The thing is that even if you only pay 5%, 1% of the value of the property, you become full homeowner since the beginning. This is the I may say the safest part. So you don't have a landlord. You can change the property. You can sell the property. You give it in inheritance. The problem, for example, for me, an inferior type of ownership would be, for example, the collective, precisely the collective ownership. This we have an example in Denmark. For example, in Denmark, many cooperatives have failed in the first thousands. In the very first moment when people in the cooperatives realize that their properties are worth a lot of money suddenly because of urban things or because of the economy or whatever, and say, okay, why should I stay here if I can sell this and then make profit on that and then go to a big chalet in the outskirts or whatever? And the cooperatives say no. But what happens when the majority of the cooperatives say yes? That yes, we all like money and we go to big chalets, so the cooperative is destroyed. So this is collective. There are many examples also in the USSR, everywhere, yeah, where sharing things always bring this kind of thing. So it's good to know that community land trusts are working, and as a way of, and you have found this way of dividing the ownership of the land, but you retain the full ownership of the flat. This is good thing. This combination. Pure cooperatives have many examples in history that really don't fit, don't work. And about the other thing, the controlling. Well, it's of course this is not a matter of a law saying like for example rent control or rent freeze in Berlin saying okay, you cannot increase the rent and that's it. So these are market rules. I am not an economist, but I believe in options, giving options. So options means if you have the option to go for full ownership and you have options to go for tenancies and you have options for social housing and you have options, true options. So interesting options. You know, here today in Spain, 80% of current tenants would like to become homeowners if they could. 80% of current tenants. So nobody in Spain, in Italy, in Portugal, in Greece, in Eastern European countries. If you talk about cooperatives in Eastern European countries, I mean, you will be, I mean, absolutely. I mean, in 5 minutes, the conversation will end up. Yes. If there is anyone in the audience from Eastern Europe, will say, okay, we have enough for 50 years on cooperatives. Yeah. So we want to be homeowners and we don't want landlords and we don't want to share anything with anybody. So basically, when you go to this, the control means if you have many options, you can fraction. You can fraction prices, you can fraction options, and then you can decide, okay, can I afford to buy a full flat in Barcelona today? No, I cannot. But because it's worth, let's say, 500 euros, 500,000 euros, a little thing of 60 square meters without an elevator in the middle of a rusty neighborhood. Yes, but okay, but I don't like landlords. I don't want to risk my family to get my rent increased in 3 years' time and so on and so forth. But then I can afford paying, let us say, 10%, and I can get a little mortgage on that, and then I can go to, and we can agree on a price, saying, okay, I need it for 10 years, 20 years, and then I want also to buy an option to, in case I want to execute it, so I will be able to stay if my economy goes better. So, which means that I could afford being a homeowner in Barcelona, but if we don't have this intermediate tenures, it's not possible. Yes, so this is the thing. But I agree with you that we need sort of training and social conscience on that. It's not so easy. It is a tradition since Napoleon times of 200,000 years, which means that basically it is the very first moment that people can do that. Since then, yes. But thank you for the questions. Very nice. Good. Yeah.
Hi, could I ask a question as well? Thank you. Yeah.
Yes,
I mean, in England we are very familiar with shared ownership, as you've said. And one thing, just first of all, a statement. One thing that we can do is that we can actually buy lease extensions. So if the lease is declining in years and you get to 90 years and you want to go back to 125 years, you can buy an extension, which makes the property worth a bit more money. But the other issue that we find repeatedly with people who are buying on shared ownership, yes, they have to pay 100% of maintenance costs, but they also have to pay 100% of service costs. And many of the buildings where we have shared ownership are flats that have many shared facilities. So they have entry phones, CCTV, they have their windows cleaned, they have cleaning facilities, they have communal gardens. All of these things cost quite a lot of money. And then they also have what's called a sinking fund for the maintenance into the future. So many shared owners find that an extra cost on top and find it quite difficult sometimes, because those costs are not controlled by them. They're controlled by the association. Yeah, the association is deciding how to run that block and decides how those costs must be paid and what they are. That's an issue that many people in shared ownership are finding a bit troublesome for them, an extra cost on top.
Yes, I can imagine this. Thank you very much, Paul, for the comment that helps us to understand the whole system. Basically, there is a big difference between your leasehold and shared ownership and our temporary ownership and shared ownership. Our system is 100%. I mean, it's full ownership. It's not you don't need a sort of company that rules the whole building. Yes, so you are the full owner. So you are the full owner of the whole building as well. So if you have, for example, this 20% on your flat, you are the 20% owner of the whole building. Yes, more or less. Yes, which means basically that it's yourself and your co-owners that decide on the needs of reparation and so on of the maintenance of the whole building facilities. We call it condominium. It's a condominium basically. Yes, and yes, in our case as well, they have to pay for 100%. But because of this Roman principle of ubi monumentum ibi onus, if you enjoy everything, you have to pay for everything.
Yes,
it's a tested rule of 2,300 years. I mean, my discipline is civil law, which means basically its roots is 2,300 years, more or less, the modern one, which means that the other ones are experiments for us. Yes.
What did the Romans ever do for us?
Oh, everything. Also for England. Also for England. Civilization, the wall, so many things.
Yes. Thank you.
Welcome.
Okay, so we do not have super much time left. What I'm going to do, because I will only need a minute or two to close, I'm going to direct one question to each of you, bearing in mind that we have just around 8 to 10 minutes left from the questions that we had left over. So for Geert, there was a question about the waiting time and how long it usually takes to kind of the acquiring process. How long is the waiting time to get a CLT home? That was from Lorena. And then for Paul, Julie was wondering, she says, exploiting underutilized community assets such as schools also has its limits. Do you think building on top of or on such sites is the future? And for Sergio, there are two questions. I mean, yeah, if we can maybe go over a little bit. Julie was wondering how you relate this to the commercial build-to-rent movement. And Maxime had a similar question about the speculation. So isn't it possible that you can simply kind of operate that speculative logic by buying shares, waiting for the overall value of land and property in that location to go up and then sell your shares? Doesn't it end up being the same? So Geert, Paul, Sergio, let's do it in that order.
Okay, well, the waiting lists, they are too long. I mean, we are able to produce, let's say, 25 homes each year. This is with the grants we receive what's possible. and we would like to, and we have, as I said, more or less 400 families who are applicant members. So it will take a lot of years unless we have the possibility to increase the production, which of course is something that we really want. And we think that by proving now the concept with more and more homes who are occupied, that we have a good case to defend towards the regional government to increase the funding so we can build more and reduce the waiting lists. There's another element to the question, that is when the way we work, we do our allocations not when the homes are finished, but a few years before, mainly on the moment we have the building permits, which means that we form the group of future residents 2 or 3 years in advance of people moving in, and that is, I think, a really good thing, which makes it possible for people to know each other before they move in. It gives us the possibility to organize trainings, to prepare them to become homeowner, to create relations with the neighborhood, etc.
Okay, yeah, thank you. Exploiting underused assets has its limits. Yes, it does. Absolutely, it has its limits. There are some places where I don't think we would go in terms of talking to a community asset. I don't think we would seek to build on top of schools. I don't think that's an appropriate place to put flats directly over a school. And we would struggle to persuade anybody that that was a good idea, I think, and it's not something that we would attempt to do. But there are other places where flats are being built right now or have been built in the past. For instance, health facilities, surgeries and the like, where people have local health facilities. They are part of the community already. They don't actually need a lot of land around them. So you can build flats on top, and we have done that. At Shepherd's Bush, we have built flats on top of health facilities. It's possible on top of supermarkets. Supermarkets, I think, are an enormous waste of land. They cover acres of space, often on a single story, and they have huge car parks as well around them. Sometimes they're not in the right place for the type of housing that we want to provide, but where they are, it's possible to build on top. But you need to get the corporate will of the big companies to realize that that's an opportunity to use the space that you've got and say, let's build in the air. You've already got that site, let's go above. So there are still opportunities. I think there are many community assets out there that we could utilize for building in the air. Thank you.
Okay, and then thank you. And then it's the question was about what is the relationship between these intermediate tenures and the commercial build to rent. Well, this is precisely what happened in 2007 and for the last 14 years, and also start beginning or continues being happening in Spain, for example, and in many other countries, which is that only big companies are able to buy. Families, households cannot afford buying because of the constraints, because of the economy, because unemployment, because everything. And these are big companies that are investing funds and so on. They are investing in properties and renting them out. Yes, shared ownership and temporary ownership will allow or allows regular families, households to buy in an affordable way. So instead of only giving the possibility for buying to big companies that they are the only ones that can afford the full ownership in many cities, we are giving opportunities to families that could also buy that. And also in relation to the speculation and buying shares. Well, I am a civil lawyer, and all civil institutions are neutral. Ownership is neutral, tenancies are neutral, and so on and so forth. So they are tools. They are tools to regulate our relationships as human beings. Yes. Of course, you can use any tool. You can use any tool as a speculative thing. Anything. Yes. even if you design as a collective thing and so on and so forth. So there are so many examples on that of collective things that a leader, we call it macho alpha in Spain, a leader that rules everything according to his own thinking and so on and so forth. So many examples. You can distort any kind of institution. But shared ownership, for example, of course, you can also you can always buy PCs and speculate with that. But technically, it is thought for living in there, because you have to take care of all expenses, as I said before, just because you are allowed to enjoy everything. Yes, and if you don't enjoy anything and you pay for everything, I think it's a bit messy. I mean, you can do that, but why are you interested in just speculating with 20% in several properties instead of just buying whole properties everywhere? That's what they are doing right now. So, well, I mean, I think it doesn't add anything extra to the speculation thing. It's a matter of a tool, of an institution, and of course, any institution can be used in one way or in another.
Well, thank you all for your answers. It's 12 o'clock, so that brings us to the end of this webinar. I wanted to say personally that I think it's very enriching. I mean, I was involved in the editing and the finalizing process of the publication, and of course, it's broad in how many projects it includes, but you're always limited in how much you can say. And I think that's kind of the idea behind these webinars, is that we really allow the people behind the projects to expand and also interact. I think that's really valuable for that kind of exchange to take place. So thank you all so much for joining us today. I wanted to, maybe if Clotilde wanted to say any closing words, if she is here.
Yes. No, I just wanted to thank you. I think, as you said, Miriam, it's a great opportunity for us to have the project to connect together as well. That was one of the ideas of the Housing Solutions platform. It's also good to see projects that go against this trend of financialization of housing. And as Sorka said at the start of the meeting, I think your project brings hope. So thank you very much, and thank you for taking the time to contribute to this webinar. We will have new learning exchange on different topics in September. So if you log in on our website or subscribe to the newsletter, you can be kept informed of the 50 solution future development. Thank you so much to speakers and participants.
And one little last thing, we have a question from Maite. Will the video and presentations be sent to participants? This is being recorded, so we will put it on our website. And I'm assuming our panelists agree that we can share the presentations. So we will be sure to share them with the participants, and they will also be up on our website soon. Thank you all,
bye -bye.
and thanks to all the participants as well.
Bye-bye.
Bye.